interview Jonathan Galea from BCAS. But today we're going to talk about an interesting concept in crypto that's recently popped up, and that's the coincidence of once. And today we have on the perfect guest to talk about that. We have Felix from CowSwap. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. So I have been following CowSwap for a while. You guys have been building some very cool systems that allow for essentially a person to send out an intent of what they want to do, right? So I want to swap ETH for USDC. I want to trade some meme coin for, I don't know, something, right? And it gets filled, right? Like the order goes out and it kind of gets filled. And this kind of like wraps into a broader question of, okay, well, a lot of people have these wants. They want to be able to swap from one asset to another. They want to be able to use certain DeFi protocols. They have intents, right? I think is the marketing term that we've been calling it. But the system that we're using right now is quite inefficient when it comes to matching those wants. And so that's where CowSwap comes in. And I guess you guys have been looking at that a little bit more deeply and trying to figure out how you can match those wants across the EVM. So welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here. Do you want me to explore a bit more on the intro that you gave, or is?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because yeah, you were mentioning the intents already, and ironically, our journey actually didn't start with intents. Our journey started primarily with the observation that the existing ways of trading assets on Ethereum and DeFi generally were kind of broken and lend themselves to what is broadly known as MEV, maximally extractable value, or basically games where more sophisticated parties observe what kind of transactions less sophisticated parties are doing, and then trying to reorder transactions or insert transactions on their own to exploit the slippage tolerance or price deviation tolerance that those parties have. And the kind of fundamental flaw in our minds was that within the same Ethereum block, we observe multiple trades on the same token pair with different prices. So if you're buying Ether with USDC today on Uniswap, for instance, and I was buying Ether with USDC on Uniswap in the very same instant of time, we get included in the very same block, then we would still have different execution prices, because either one of us would go first. And so one would get the previous spot price on the AMM, and whoever goes second would get the slightly worse price. And so now if you're the validator or somebody else that's observing these kind of behaviors, you can make sure that you're always in the position that gets the better price and put the less sophisticated user in the position where they get the worst price. So you buy low, you sell high atomically within the same block and get like a somewhat risk-free arbitrage. And so the idea that we had very early on, when we were still part of the Gnosis ecosystem, was to build an exchange where every asset just has a single price per block. And so if two people buy the same asset in the same block, it doesn't matter in which order they get executed, they will get the exact same clearing price. Now, in the traditional Ethereum kind of transaction-based model, this is not possible. If you have a signed transaction, I have a signed transaction, there's no way how the validator could unbundle those and make sure that we kind of get the same execution price. And so the means to actually achieving this type of system was for us to stop people from sending signed transactions that have to be included exactly as they are, but instead signing intents, what they are now called, trade intents, basically just saying, I want to exchange this asset for that asset, and here's my limit price. I don't care exactly how it's done. I don't care if you go to Uniswap or SushiSwap, or if you find another user that actually wants to do the opposite trade. And yeah, basically this is how the system was born. And intents, yeah, as you kind of alluded to already, lend themselves to this concept of coincidence of wants. If you were buying Ether in the same block and I was selling Ether in that block, then instead of us both trading against an AMM and paying for gas, paying for LP fees, and paying price impact, we can just kind of meet at the middle, meet at the spot price, and trade with one another peer to peer. And that gives us a structural price improvement that no other kind of on-chain DEX can provide to users at the moment. And that's kind of where the name also CowSwap comes from, and what's kind of our one of our main unique selling points, I'd say.
Yeah, the way that I understand it is more of a sense of like market orders and limit orders when you're talking about like a normal like central limit order book, like a CLOB. Like before something like CowSwap came along and we had quote unquote intents, everybody was just making market orders, right? They were just firing off these like taker orders because they're taking, right? I mean, you take. And so the more sophisticated players who are in this ecosystem would, like you said, like determine the order of those take transactions so that they could profit the most. That it essentially turns it into this exploitive payment for order flow style system. And now with CowSwap, we now have a way to do quasi limit orders where you can broadcast the end state of what you want to get to. Like I have some ETH, I want to swap it for some USDT or USDC, and then somebody else can come and fill that when it makes sense, right? When there's an opportunity or arbitrage that they can engage in. And so then you no longer become the taker, you now become the maker for that order. So it switches everybody around in how they participate.
Yes, that's a good way to think about it. I would say though that even before CowSwap, the concept of limit order existed, and 0x orders, for instance, are limit orders that have been around much longer than CowSwap. I think the concept that CowSwap brought along was giving people price improvements on their limit prices, on their limit orders. So in historically, if you had a resting 0x limit order to, let's say, sell ETH when it hits $3,000, then as soon as ETH would reach or climb above $3,000, some sophisticated market maker might come in and settle your order, but they would have zero incentive to give you the current fair market price. And let's say the price of Ether went from 2,999 to 3,010, then you would get matched at your limit price, which is 3,000. And even if there was another resting limit order that wanted to that wanted to buy Ether at maybe 2,900, then that market maker would buy low, sell high, and again make this profit. And then maybe in consequence, like who actually the profit is not even captured by the market maker that is trying to fill these coincidence of ones. Kind of historically, they actually have to bribe most of their profit to the validators to make sure that they actually get the right to include their transaction, not some other market maker who also sees this arbitrage and wants to take it.
Yeah.
And the novel thing that CowSwap brought along was this idea of surplus, and not giving somebody the right to execute a batch or an arbitrage or a set of orders based on how much bribe they pay to the validator, but instead turning that optimization criterion around and saying you get priority if you pay more value to the user than your competitors. And that value to the user is captured or is measured in price improvement on top of your limit price. And so let's assume we have two solvers in the CowSwap ecosystem that both see your order wanting to sell Ether at $3,000. Ether has jumped to $3,005. Then whatever solver gives you the better price, so let's say $3,004.99, is the solver that will get the right to execute the batch and thus have access to the arbitrage opportunity, but shifting the value to the user instead of to the validators.
So when we talk about trade-offs in this system, right? So in the previous system, like the I guess monolithic Uniswap v2 system, you had transaction order routing, but there's a level of, I guess, independence in those transactions where the user essentially builds them themselves, fires them off, and just they're in charge of the execution. But here we have CowSwap, which is now taking those orders and putting them into its own routing system. You have the solvers who are competing in an auction to essentially fill those orders. And so there takes a level of independence away from it. And it also takes, these orders don't have to be filled from an LP, right? Somebody could have just their own stash of ETH or USDC, which they could fill from their own wallets. And so it changes the dynamic a little bit of how orders are solved. I mean, you could even have assets that are on like a centralized exchange that are used to fulfill these orders. So like, what do you think about this change in the, I guess, market structure dynamics of how the different parties are related and about how they're executing transactions here?
Yeah. So I think you're saying it takes some independence away from the user. I think it also abstracts a lot of complexity away from the user. Making sure that you actually craft a transaction in the best possible way and then submit it in a manner that where you don't overpay but also don't get basically value extracted is a non-trivial task. And basically just saying, here's the trade that I want to make, and here's my limit price, and then have a reasonable guarantee of getting the best possible execution in terms of like your individual price improvement, I think is a huge advantage for 99% of the users. So I think the only people that will say like, oh, you're taking independence away from me are searchers or market makers or snipers that are basically that are very sophisticated and know how to play the game better than basically CowSwap solvers do.
Well, Ellen, let me rephrase the question. So I just wanted to put it in terms of the people supplying the assets. So like with a Uniswap v2 contract, you have all the assets are held within that contract. So the LPs essentially aggregate the fees across the entire LP base. And this changed a little bit with Uniswap v3. Now you can have different ranges. It does introduce a bit more complexity and sophistication to that. And now with CowSwap, we essentially moved to like full sophistication for the solvers, where the solvers that are able to quote the best all the time and have the tightest spreads are going to do the most volume, and essentially take the arbitrage profits or whatever type of profits they're making from fulfilling that transaction. And I guess the question that I wanted to ask is like, what does this mean for like market dynamics where, like with Uniswap 2 and also Uniswap 3, like you can, like me, myself as a retail person who's doesn't have institutional capital behind them, can add my funds to an LP contract. They can be used to source liquidity for people, and I can earn a revenue from that. But when the CowSwap model, it kind of gets offlaid into this like third party, like again, the most complex, the most sophisticated solvers who can essentially balance out their inventory on what they have on chain versus maybe off chain. Maybe they're using futures or some sort of perpetuals as well to hedge out the risk. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into when talking about like the market participant dynamics.
Right. Okay. So maybe like even one more step before, like who are the market participants, or who basically what I think the model takes a lot of complexity away from the user, and it also kind of transforms the structure in something that is not really the user is kind of has that, like the question in market making often is the last look. Who has last look? Who can decide whether or not who has like this free option problem, basically, in a sense. And in the past, when the users were creating their own transactions and trading against Uniswap, the user was kind of in full control of their trade intent and their transaction until the very last minute. We talked about these limits orders earlier, or generally requests for quote systems, where I, as a user, say, oh, look, here's what I want to trade. And then the market maker can basically tell me, oh, here's a quote I give you. But as a user, I usually would, at least in the past, also still sign a message and then leave it up to the market maker to execute this trade. So then the market maker would have last look. In CowSwap, you now have a system where you kind of neither have either. It's still the user that moves first and submits their intent. But then solvers compete for the fulfillment of this intent. And as soon as you've bid to fulfill the intent, the system will kind of keep you on the hook and basically make sure that if you back out, you can't do that at free cost. You'll basically have to pay a penalty if you're not fulfilling the quote that you have submitted in the auction. And I think this makes it actually a nice system for users in that they don't necessarily have to give market makers that free option, but it also makes it better for market makers compared to like traditional DEX aggregators where you had market maker integrations, but you would never know, will the user actually execute the trade, or are they just quoting until maybe my offer is stale and they can actually pick off on me. And yeah, so and also when we initially said like we take a lot of complexity, I think this actually leads to a lot of more non-toxic flow coming through CowSwap. And so on the solver side, I think the types of orders you see in the system are, if you're talking like PFOF terms, much more valuable than flow you would see on non-intent trading systems like traditional DEX aggregators.
Yeah, I think we've talked about toxic flow a little bit, and about like loss over rebalancing as well too. And for market makers that have inventory and have to keep it somewhere, it's actually disadvantageous, or they're actually at a disadvantage to keep it inside of a V2 or even V3 contract. It's just they don't earn enough fees and they don't control the spread well enough to be able to adjust to market conditions dynamically like they would inside of a centralized CLOB. And so working with something like CowSwap, they can essentially, because they're auctioning for the order, they can keep their spreads where they want, right? They can fill the type of price that they want to, and they can ensure that they remain profitable versus something like V2 or V3 where you don't have that. And so that's just a different issue for the large market makers that they have to work through.
Right. And you're also mentioning liquidity providers or retail users being able to be liquidity providers in like the traditional UniV2 style pools. And that's interesting because for sure, this is one of the biggest innovations that Uniswap has gave us, basically making liquidity provision something that anybody can do. And, frankly, a lot of tokens would probably not exist if every project would have to fight with market makers for the right to pay expensive deals to get proper liquidity for their token. So that's a huge innovation. At the same time, it leads, especially now with the rise of intent-based systems, to the issue of toxicity for liquidity, for passive liquidity providers. As more and more flow gets taken by those professional market makers kind of before we hit the Uniswap pools, what is left to then go into the passive liquidity providers is mainly, well, okay, maybe if market makers are out of inventory, or if for whatever reason the price on the LP is outdated and therefore advantageous for the trader, but disadvantageous for the passive liquidity provider. So I think kind of the next 1-2 years ago, the traders were kind of the victims, and it was really difficult to or required a lot of sophistication to do trades on Ethereum without being taken advantage of. Thanks to those intent-based systems like CowSwap, we now have kind of made it more secure for traders to truthfully reveal their slippage tolerance, truthfully reveal their limit prices, and have like reasonable guarantees that they get the best possible execution. And we are actually now looking into doing the same thing for liquidity providers. The concept of LVR and basically always trading at some outdated price, and searcher or market maker hedging their position on a centralized exchange with the new price, but getting to access some of your liquidity at outdated prices is a cost to liquidity providers. Mm-hmm. And by lifting LPs like Uniswap pools into the CowSwap batch and into kind of this global coincidence of ones optimization problem where we try to maximize the surplus for all participants, we hope that we can tackle LVR as one of the next kind of big taxes on DeFi users.
Yeah, I don't think Uniswap was designed for like large scale market making. We see it now as the perfect DEX to take care of like long tail assets, and the assets that need to be liquid and need to have these tight spreads. A system like CowSwap where you can have an RFQ system, it just makes sense, not just from the liquidity providers, but also from the users as well too. And I think that's where we get into some of the discussions that you've been having recently about coincidence of wants. So maybe you can explain that a little bit and kind of tie it into how CowSwap is trying to attack that problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically a coincidence of wants just means you want one thing, and I mean, basically you want to sell token A for token B, and I want to buy token A for token B. So we happen to have opposite ones roughly at the same time, non-coordinated, so it's kind of a coincidence. And if you actually look on Ethereum today and just check what pairs are traded in every block individually, you'll see that there happens to be a lot of kind of uncoordinated coincidence of ones. People selling Ether on Uniswap, and in the same block, somebody's buying Ether on Uniswap, maybe across different dexes. And the goal of CowSwap is basically to get all that order flow into a single auction where we can clear or match trades directly with one another, peer-to-peer, in a way where we have less gas costs for updating those Uniswap pools. We have less price impact because we're not moving the price up and then down again. And I mean, first and foremost, we also save the spread, which is still like 0.3% on each side for most Uniswap pairs, by just literally saying, okay, if we both want the opposite thing, then let's just meet at the current spot price and trade at midpoint.
Yeah. So just to kind of break that down. So when we talk about like beforehand, the old system, everybody's firing off their own transactions. Those can be expensive, especially when gas is high. I mean, you could pay 20, 30, 40, 50, or even more dollars for a Uniswap swap transaction. But if you, Felix, want to sell one ETH and I want to buy one, I want to buy like 2 ETH, and maybe DeFi Advisor wants to sell an ETH as well too. We could use a system where we all kind of like put our wants in, our intents of what we want, and then we could have a more gas efficient way of essentially solving that, so we all get what we want at the end of the day.
Right, and I think one thing that is where CowSwap is very far ahead of its competition is that we don't just look at these kind of obvious coincidence of ones on the same token pair. So if you want to sell USDC for ETH and I want to buy USDC for ETH, okay, it's kind of like obvious that we should just do that peer-to-peer. But you can also look at kind of all trades in kind of a holistic, multi-dimensional, I think the proper economic term is barter economy, where if I want to buy Ether for Bitcoin and DeFi Advisor wants to buy USDC or Bitcoin for USDC, and you, Sam, want to buy Ether for USDC, then even though we don't have a direct coincidence of ones, kind of obviously, we can kind of align all our intents and do a ring trade, and still, without using any external liquidity, satisfy our wants peer-to-peer.
Yeah. And like how big can this scale? Like how many users could be a part of a coincidence of ones ring transaction?
Yeah, I mean, there's technical limitations on the Ethereum blockchain on how many trades can we settle within a block, just because of the sheer block gas limit. As far as we can tell right now, this is not going to be an issue anytime soon. I don't have the benchmarks at the top of my head right now, but when we launched the contract, we did some how many orders can be settled within a batch, and it's like north of 100, and that's not the throughput that Ethereum currently has, or even with a significant growth will not have anytime soon. I think the real difficulty here comes from the mathematical complexity of solving that multidimensional optimization problem. We have, as we're still part of Gnosis, tried to build our own solver and kind of implementation that finds the optimal solution. We know that some other solvers have also done sophisticated research trying to find the global optimum, but this problem is not tractable. It's definitely NP hard, and so at the end of the day, we need heuristics and we need simplifications. And as soon as you get hundreds of thousands of orders into the batch, you cannot solve it to optimality anymore. That being said, this is one of the other aspects where the solver competition that we have deployed comes in handy. We don't necessarily need to find the global optimum and solve this mathematical problem kind of exactly. What the protocol defines is a approximation, or just an objective criterion, and then it's up to the solvers to get as close, or we don't even know what the optimal value is, but we're just ranking solutions by whoever is better. And even if you cannot find the optimal, as long as you find a very good solution, you might win and get the right to execute. So we're kind of solving this NP hard problem by decentralizing into a solver competition.
So it kind of moves into a, I mean, would you consider this like an off-chain order book matching system?
At the moment, yes. I think, yes, at the moment, definitely we have the vast majority of our orders off-chain for user experience, gas efficiency, and cost reasons. I think we're excited about dank sharding and the possibility of putting cheap call data on chain to potentially make the order book not part of on-chain state, but at least part of on-chain data availability consensus. But yeah, at the end of the day, we don't have an on-chain order book where every order is stored in the Ethereum state.
As our guest Tarek would say, you guys need an L2.
Yeah, I mean, I think for now, we really just need data availability. And for that, Ethereum hopefully will soon have a solution. And I think if we have like data availability consensus on which orders are available per batch, and then the other thing we need is data availability consensus on which solutions have been proposed for a batch, then it's pretty clear off-chain to decide, was the solution valid? Has the best solution been picked? And so all kind of, slashing or other economic post-processing can then happen decentralized without an L2.
And so, like, where does CowSwap fit in with other intent-based systems? So I know that Flashbots is working on Suave, and there's several other ones that are being built out as well too. Do you guys just integrate with them at a transactional level? Like, how do you see that future playing out?
Yeah, I mean, specifically for swapping, I think there's some intent-based systems that are just general. We can do all kinds of intents. I think CowSwap historically has come from, let's start with swap intents, and then let's extend our intent expression language and do things before or after the swap, or maybe in the future even make the swap optional. But yeah, basically we converge kind of to the same thing, but specifically when we think about swap intents, I think there's huge network effects that will make it so that there's one predominant system in 5, maybe 10 years where 70, 80, 90% of retail trades will happen on, just because if you have a coincidence of one system with 1,000 users, that's more valuable than if you have a coincidence of one batch with like 10 users, right? So those network effects lead to more price improvements, and therefore I think have like these kind of winner takes all, but like there will be, I think, a prominent batch auction system on Ethereum, and I mean we are working hard to make Cow Protocol be that one. With regards to competitors, yeah, so I've seen Anoma, and we are talking to Suave. I think they're positioning themselves more as like an infrastructure solution now, so they are potentially a candidate for powering Cow Protocol batches and decentralizing the auction. Other than that, we've seen, I guess, intent-based trading systems such as 1inch Fusion and Uniswap X. Those are not really focusing on surplus maximization or like price improvements for the users. They're also not able to do coincidence of ones. So I think we're still somewhat ahead of the innovation curve when it comes to that competition.
Yeah. So like, how does everything get aggregated? Because we're moving to this point where like I don't even trade with the regular Uniswap front end anymore. I shout out for our listeners. I just switched to Rabby, and anybody who's not using Rabby, you should. If you're still using outdated Dinosaur MetaMask, you definitely should switch over, and you can use the code Leviathan News to sign up for Rabby. Even if you don't use, baby. Even if you don't use the code, Rabby's like pretty awesome, and it has this nice little swap feature in there where it has a built-in aggregation, both of like 5 or 10 different on-chain aggregators, and then also has access to centralized exchange liquidity as well too. And so, where does CowSwap fit in with this like future of aggregation?
Yeah, so I would differentiate CowSwap into 2 parts. One of them is really CowSwap, swap.cow.fi, the UI that you currently see, which is an entry point for regular users to place their trade intents and execute swaps. And I mean, down the line, I think those user-facing entry points are going to be super important, and whoever captures the order flow from real retail users will capture a lot of the value. But then the other part of CowSwap or Cow protocol is its underlying mechanism, and that's what I would refer to as Cow protocol, which is really this batching layer where we say we aggregate trade intents, we define some rules for optimal matching, and then we orchestrate and monitor and police this solver competition to execute on those rules of the game. And Cow protocol at its core is quite agnostic to where it receives flow from, and it's definitely our goal to integrate with as many flow providers as possible. We are already receiving a good amount of flow from DeFi Llama. We are integrated into Balancer, and we're talking to a lot of other integration partners as well, because the protocol itself doesn't care really which UI is used. Then at the same time, whenever you build a product, you need to make sure that it's getting the right adoption and features are used the way that you intend them to use. So I think CowSwap itself has done a great job at showcasing the power of intents and really driving user experience and trading experience forward. So I wouldn't count the impact and value of our UI short, but I would say that they're fundamentally two slightly different products that could live in orthogonal to one another.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty cool.
I mostly use DeFi Swap, DeFi Llama Swap in the last few months, and honestly, I think that at least half the times it chooses CowSwap for me with the best deal. Honestly.
Yeah, I would agree on that. Yeah.
Then we need to figure out what happens on the other 50% of the time.
That's a winner's answer. That's a real winner's answer. something has to be wrong with these with the other half.
So how much can you guys save? I mean, this is a report that came out the other day that you guys posted on Twitter, but what was the figure that if everybody was using a coincidence of one system, how much would be saved?
Yeah, so it's been quite a long time that we ran a study like this ourselves. I think it was back in 2021 when we kind of, or even a little bit earlier when we started really doubling down on the project and deciding also, should we do just focus on one-dimensional coincidence of one, so only if you trade on the same pair, or should we look into this barter multi-dimensional world as well? This is the post from last week, right? And so I'm quite happy to see one of our solvers actually come up with a more up-to-date post. I haven't been able to fully fact check the actual data that I think they've implemented an algorithm that tries to solve for these coincidence of ones and then ran it historically on blocks over a certain period of time. The number that they've come up with is higher than what we came up with back in the day, but it doesn't necessarily surprise me as value that's been transacted on chain has gone up, and generally the fragmented, we in a world where it's super easy to create a new token and where we have 10 LSTs representing a staked ether and 20 coins representing a US dollar. The amount of benefit you can get from doing these kind of coincidence of one ring trades over multiple token pairs really kind of re-aggregates that fragmented liquidity that we see. And so the number that was reported by Barta is something like $1.5 million of value daily.
So they say that in just 25 blocks, it was feasible to match 61.5% of the trading volume and 13.3% of transactions processed through routers. And so if that was being routed through a full coincidence one system, that efficiency would result in a surplus of $6,150. And that's just 25 blocks, right? And so if you take that over the entire day blocks, which is about 7,150, it's about $1.5 million of fees and other costs that would be saved a day.
Yeah. So when we did the analysis back in the day, we were also thinking about the speed trade-off. Some people are really, I want to get my trade done now and I want to land in the next block and no matter what, match me in the next block. But I think there's a good amount of users that just want to, harvest their yield farm returns or enter a position, exit a position, not necessarily in this specific block or not necessarily in the next 30 seconds. And for those users, I think a system where you actually wait for, and don't just look at coincidence of ones in every single block, but over the period of maybe 2, 3, 4 blocks combined, you will actually see numbers that are much higher than those for a single block, and you might still be able to create a product and create a product experience where traders are actually willing to say, well, I don't care if you match me within the next hour or the next day, as long as you can guarantee that I get the best possible price with the lowest possible cost, then I'm down for that.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge amount of money that you guys can potentially save. I mean, I hope that you guys can get the system built out and implemented as fast as possible. We did have a couple of questions from the audience. So Taylor McRae, you asked about the lore of adding the moo noise to the CowSwap app, the greatest innovation to DeFi in recent years.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, the way that CowSwap came along was a great joint venture of Gnosis technical team and the kind of more product business development side. Gnosis, if I don't know if you're familiar, had has a track record of building really good products, but not making it in a way that people actually appreciate or like what they're building. So they have like great. So I wouldn't even say great products. They have great tech. And I think things changed now. Now they also have great products, but like for a long time we've been working on really advanced stuff that 2-3 years later people would reinvent and then basically say, oh, this is, and it would take off. And then at Gnosis we're always saying like, didn't we talk about this 2 or 3 years ago? Why did it never take off? So we had this problem of actually making something that people love. And so while we were working on what's now CowSwap, which was called Gnosis Protocol version 2, very unappealing name, we had this great brainstorming session with our product team, business development, marketing team, and I think our front-end lead was also involved. And we've been talking about these coincidence of ones and matching people peer-to-peer for a while. And out of a sudden, I can't even credit who it was, but out of a sudden somebody just had this idea of like, oh, let's call it CowSwap and let's make it super memey and let's have cows everywhere and have a moo sound and all these kind of things. And so I would say, at least to a definitely very significant degree, that non-technical contribution to the product has been the cause of a lot of our success. And we even had a little competition in-house where people would record moo sounds at home and then submit them, and we would pick the best one. Because one of the moo sound is actually not a cow, but a human imitating one.
Then he also had another question about when is CowSwap going to be on Arbitrum?
So this is one of the main questions we get when other chains, when L2s, and I mean Arbitrum is definitely one of the L2s we are looking, or side chains L2s. Don't nail me on the definition here. To that we are looking into very actively. Just a little bit of background why it's not as simple as, okay, let's just deploy the contracts and go. Like, what are you waiting for? CowSwap has a pretty complex off-chain infrastructure and off-chain mechanism. We have the off-chain order book, we have the solvers, we have a solution submission that needs to happen, we have the ranking, we have rewards that we're paying out to those solvers. And all those systems take resources and also require maintenance when multiplied to many chains. And so one of the things we're trying to do right now is really like nail the product and user experience on mainnet. Make sure that we have best possible execution, as little delays as possible, support as many tokens, have the best solver competition, the best reward structure, the best mechanism. And then also we just started charging a protocol fee to make sure that our unit economics are solid. And then with that foundation, go and multiply and scale on many chains. I think what we've seen some of the competition do is just go to multi-chains before the product was fully, I mean, the product is ready, but before the product was like fully optimized and fully perfected. And that has, what we've observed, taken a lot of focus away from those teams, and they've not been able to move as fast afterwards. That being said, I think to just give a date in Q2 this year, we want to deploy in at least one other network, and then we'll see how much maintenance effort, how much extra work this actually is, and I mean, in theory, or like what we would like to do is be on all EVM compatible chains as soon as possible. We're just trying to make sure that we are able to deliver the great product experience we have on mainnet without jeopardizing our operational capacities and the complexity that we have to deal with.
And also, liquidity is pretty much like the real liquidity is on mainnet anyway.
Yeah.
Any way you look at it, you know
Yeah.
what I mean. Like it's true, and I think that for me, for sure, as an mostly use Arbitrum, and it will be great if and when CowSwap is already there. But if I'm trying to look at it from CowSwap eyes and say the move myself, so I don't know. This is not that interesting business wise because the difference in liquidity is like magnitudes.
Well, I mean, CowSwap, just based on how it's built, should be able to fill larger transactions at better rates than what you would find through existing LPs on Uniswap or Curve, just because of the size, right? Like, because they can source liquidity from centralized exchanges or from private inventory, making those swaps should be scalable into the hundreds of millions.
Right. So, but one thing that's like very important for coincidence of once also is the velocity. Not necessarily. I mean, the size is important for the absolute money saved, but then how many traders there are within a batch really to have some value add. It doesn't really matter how much these people are trading, and we do realize that right now CowSwap is used, like our average trade size is significantly higher than on some of our competitors' products, and so we do realize that smaller retail users are we are lacking behind, and we definitely, there's no structural reason to exclude any user group. So we definitely would, we want to be on all these chains, and yes, Arbitrum is of course one of the ones that we're looking into right now.
Yeah, well, great. Well, Felix, thank you for coming on today. I learned a lot about coincidence once and also CowSwap as well too. Where can people find you?
So I mean, CowSwap, we have a Discord. We can find all of us, all of the core developers and our community and contributors on Discord. Me personally, you can find me on Twitter. My handle is @Leupold_. So Leupold_. And we also are CowSwap on Twitter, and have a forum where we discuss our strategy and recent developments, especially also around how we can do MEV protection, not just for swappers, but also for LP providers. Some of the things that we are working on right now, which is quite exciting. And thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you guys.
Cool.
Thanks for coming, man. It was cool.
Thanks everybody for tuning in at home. We'll be back tomorrow. We have an interview with Noct is coming on. So
Isekai is coming on tomorrow.
Yeah,
we're gonna talk to the Isekai team hopefully.
So Noct from Jonesdale, also Isekai. Tune in for that, and we'll see you tomorrow.